There are two kinds of people at a family gathering. The ones who are performing something, who have planned what they're going to say, who have rehearsed how it will land, who have already imagined the look on your face when they say it. And the ones who are just trying to get through the meal. I had been the second kind my entire life. My name is Wren Ashworth, and I was 23 years old on the Thanksgiving that changed everything about how I understood my family. I was a junior at the University of Vermont, studying social work because my grandmother Dorothy had once told me that the most important thing a person could do with their education was put it in the direction of someone who needed it. She had said this to me when I was 15, sitting at the kitchen table of this exact house, while she was teaching me to make her buttermilk pie. I had written it down in the small green notebook I kept in my coat pocket that year. I still have that notebook. My grandmother died in the September before that Thanksgiving. She was 82 years old, and she went the way she had lived, quietly, without making a fuss about herself, in the guest bedroom of her farmhouse on County Road 7 outside of Montpelier, Vermont, with the window open because she had always said she liked to hear the birds in the morning. I was in my dorm room when my mother called. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, and then I called my roommate Nadia, and Nadia came and sat with me, and neither of us said very much. The Thanksgiving was the family's way of coming together to settle what came next. That was how my mother put it, come together, settle what comes next. She said it the way people say things when they're trying to make something that will be difficult sound like it's going to be easy. I drove 4 hours from Burlington on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and arrived at the farmhouse at 6:44 in the evening. The maple out front had already dropped all its leaves. The porch light was on. The cedar box where Grandma kept her important papers was sitting on the kitchen counter the way it always sat. The box she had made herself in the woodworking class she took at 68 because she had decided she wanted to learn something new every decade. I did not know it yet, but that cedar box was the whole story. My brother Derek was 31. He was 8 years older than me, which meant he had been 18 when I was 10, which meant that by the time I was old enough to have a real conversation with him, he had already decided what kind of family dynamic he preferred. He was taller than me and louder than me and better at the specific skill of walking into a room and making everyone understand that he considered himself the most important person in it. He had been close to Grandma Dorothy, or he had performed closeness in a way that was hard to distinguish from the real thing unless you had spent enough time at the farmhouse to know the difference. He showed up at holidays. He called on birthdays. He sent cards at Easter that always included a note about how much Grandma meant to him. What he did not do was drive out on a regular Tuesday afternoon to sit with her when her arthritis was bad. What he did not do was answer the phone the 3 times she called him in her last 6 months because she was confused about her medication and didn't want to bother anyone. I know this because she told me not to complain about Derek. She was never a complainer, but because she called me each of those 3 times instead, and I walked her through it on the phone from my dorm room, and afterward she would always say, in that particular voice she used when she was choosing her words carefully, "You know who you can count on, Wren. That's the real thing." The first of those 3 calls came on a Wednesday in February. She had a new prescription and the pharmacy had given her a different dosage, and she was not sure whether the difference was intentional or a mistake. She had tried Derek first. She did not say this to me directly. She would never have wanted me to feel like a second choice, but I could tell from the way she moved past it, the slight carefulness of her transition. Anyway, you're the one I can always reach. I looked up the medication on my laptop while we were on the phone and stayed with her for 45 minutes until she felt settled. She thanked me 3 times. She told me I was too good for the amount of trouble this family caused. I told her she wasn't trouble. She laughed and said, I meant the rest of them. I had driven to Montpelier 11 times in the 2 years she was declining. The mileage on my Honda Accord was 12,400 miles over what it should have been for a college student who rarely left campus. I kept the receipts for the gas because I was 22 and 23 and had to budget carefully, and I didn't mind keeping them. I kept everything she gave me, including the 47 letters she had written me over the years. One every birthday, every graduation milestone, every time something happened that she thought warranted a letter. She wrote on cream-colored stationery with a fountain pen she had kept since the 1970s, and her handwriting was precise and unhurried, the kind of handwriting that tells you the person had something specific to say. I kept them in the cedar box she had given me for my 18th birthday. a smaller version of the one on her kitchen counter. The box smelled like cedar, and something else I never identified, a smell that was just hers, just the farmhouse, just that particular quality of winter light through the kitchen window while the kettle heated. The 47 letters were sitting in my dorm room in Burlington. I had not brought them to Thanksgiving. I thought about that a lot later, whether bringing them would have changed anything. I decided it wouldn't have. The document that mattered was not in my cedar box. The document that mattered was in Pamela Okafor's briefcase, and it had been there since March, and Grandma Dorothy had put it there herself, on her own terms, in her own time. The thing I knew about Derek, and had known for a long time, was that his cruelty was not simple. He was not a person who was just mean for the pleasure of it. He was a person who had been cut out himself, by their father, our father, who had a preference for his first marriage's children from a union that ended before Derek was born, and who had made that preference visible in 100 small ways over a lifetime of small ways. Derek had watched their father look through him at another set of kids, and he had decided, somewhere in the architecture of his own survival, that the answer to being made invisible was to make someone else invisible first. That someone was me. I did not understand this fully at 23. I understand it now. What I understood at 23 was that my grandmother was gone, and that the farmhouse and everything in it mattered, and that Derek had been talking for 6 weeks, since the September of her death, about what Grandma had told him, about the conversations they'd had, about how she had always said the house should stay in the family, and that he was the one who had a stable income and a plan for it, and that she would have wanted him to be the one. He said this so many times and with such confidence that by the time Thanksgiving arrived, even my mother was half convinced, and she is not a person who is easily convinced of anything. I had not argued with him about it. I had let him talk. Not because I believed him, I did not believe him, and I think somewhere underneath his performance he knew I did not believe him, but because I had learned from 23 years in this family that arguing with Derek's confidence before you had something concrete to argue with was like trying to bail out a boat with a teaspoon. You exhausted yourself and the boat stayed full. So I listened. I nodded at the appropriate moments. And I waited. The way my grandmother had always said patience was its own kind of preparation. The gathering was 16 people around a table that was meant for 12. My mother had added 2 folding tables at the far end and covered them all with the white tablecloth she only brought out at Thanksgiving, the linen one with the embroidered edge that had been her mother's. Derek and his girlfriend Sasha sat at the main table center. I sat at the far left end near the window, next to my cousin Lily, who was 17 and had her headphones around her neck and looked like she would rather be anywhere else. I understood the feeling. I had been there since the morning. I had helped my Aunt Cecile make the cornbread and the cranberry sauce and the 2 pies that were cooling on the counter. Cecile was my grandmother's older sister, 86 years old, sharp as a blade, and the only person in the family besides me who seemed genuinely uncomfortable with how the day was being framed. She had arrived at 7 in the morning in her silver Buick with a covered dish and a wool hat pulled low over her ears, and she had walked straight into the kitchen without taking off her coat and said, without greeting anyone, "Let's get the real cooking started before the speeches begin." I had loved her immediately for that. Working next to Cecile in the kitchen that morning was the closest I had felt to being at the farmhouse the way I used to be at the farmhouse, just cooking, just moving between the counter and the stove, just being in the space that smelled like all the Thanksgivings before this one. Dorothy's recipe cards were still propped in the small wooden holder on the windowsill. The copper kettle was on its burner. The cast iron skillet her grandmother had left her was hanging on its hook. All of it was still there, waiting to see what would happen to it. "Your grandmother was a careful woman," Cecile had said to me in the kitchen, not looking up from the pot of cranberries, at about 11 in the morning. She was not careless about documents. I had looked at her for a moment. I said, "What do you mean?" She had stirred the cranberries. "I mean what I said." That was all. She went back to stirring, and I went back to the cornbread, and neither of us said anything else about it until much later. But I had carried those words through every hour of the rest of that day, the setting of the table, the filling of the water glasses, the arrival of the various relatives, Derek's entrance with Sasha, and the 2 bottles of champagne he'd brought, which he set on the counter with the particular energy of someone making a statement before anyone has asked for one. I carried Cecile's words through all of it. She was not careless about documents. Derek gave his toast at 3:47 in the afternoon, before the pie, which was when he had planned to give it. I learned later from Sasha in the parking lot after everything happened that he had been practicing it. He stood up at the table with his champagne glass and talked about Grandma Dorothy. He talked about who shows up and who doesn't. He talked about the house and about legacy. He said, with the particular confidence of someone who has convinced himself that performance and reality are the same thing, Grandma knew who showed up for her. The house is mine. The rest is mine. She didn't leave her failures anything. He looked at me when he said it. He looked at me deliberately, the way someone does when they want to be sure the specific person they're speaking at has received the message.
I did not react.
I did not cry. I did not give him the scene. I picked up my water glass and I took a sip and I set it back down. I looked at the embroidered edge of the tablecloth. I thought about the 47 letters sitting in their cedar box in my dorm room in Burlington, and I thought about something my grandmother had said to me on the phone in July, for weeks before she went into her final decline. She had said, "I have made sure everything is where it should be, Ren. You don't need to worry about that." I had assumed she meant her health arrangements. I had thanked her and said I wasn't worried. She had laughed, the short, particular laugh she did when she knew something you didn't, and said, "Good. Then we agree." I had spent a lot of October and November thinking about that conversation. My Aunt Cecile was watching me from across the table. She gave me a very small nod. I almost called Pamela Okafor before Thanksgiving. I want to be honest about that, about how close I came to picking up the phone and not picking it up. I had found Pamela's name in the second week of October, on a Thursday night at 11:23 p.m., sitting at the small desk in my dorm room with my laptop open and my cold coffee going stale next to me. My grandmother had mentioned her once, the previous February on a phone call, saying she had finalized some things with her lawyer and felt good about it. I had written down the name in the green notebook, Pamela Okafor, Okafor Estate Law, Montpelier, without fully understanding why. I'm like that. I write things down. In October, I found the notebook. I found the name. I stared at it for a long time. Nadia was on her bed across the room, doing something on her laptop, and she looked up and said, "You're doing the thing where you don't say anything but the air gets heavy. What is it?" I said, "I think my grandmother may have done something that Derek doesn't know about." Nadia said, "About the will?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe." She said something on the phone in July that I keep coming back to. Nadia said, "So call the lawyer." It sounded simple. It was not simple. What if I was wrong? What if I called and made everything awkward and there was nothing to find, and I had just confirmed, to everyone including myself, that I was the difficult one, the one who couldn't accept what was handed down? I had 22 years of training in being the one who causes disruption by noticing things. I was good at talking myself out of noticing things. I sat with the phone in my hand for 17 minutes. Nadia did not say anything. She let me sit with it. The room was quiet except for the radiator ticking in the corner. My desk had 3 library books on it and a half-eaten granola bar and the green notebook, which I had been reading and rereading for 3 weeks. Not all of it, just the July entry, just the line I had written down. She laughed. She said, "Then we agree." Outside the window, the campus lights were on and a few students were crossing the quad in coats, and everything looked entirely ordinary, and I was sitting in the middle of it trying to decide whether my grandmother had left a door open or whether I was building one out of a laugh and a notebook entry and a name I had written down in February. Then I thought about the short, particular laugh she did when she knew something I didn't. And I put the phone down. I did not call Pamela Okafor. I decided to wait until after Thanksgiving, when there was something concrete to ask about. It turned out I did not need to call. The doorbell rang at 4:22 p.m. We had finished the main meal. The pies were on the counter. Derek was still at the head of the table, holding the champagne glass he'd had since the toast. My mother answered the door, because the farmhouse had been her mother's house, and she answered the door out of instinct. She came back in with a woman in a gray wool coat who looked to be in her mid-40s, unhurried, carrying a slim leather briefcase and an envelope. The woman looked at the table and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Pamela Okafor. I represent the estate of Dorothy Ashworth. I called ahead earlier this week to let the family know I would be stopping by today, but I'm not sure the message was received." Nobody said anything. I looked at Derek. His champagne glass was still in the air. Pamela Okafor set the envelope on the white tablecloth. She said, "I represent the estate of Dorothy, and I need everyone seated." There was a moment, one of those moments where you can feel the room deciding what it's about to be. Then my Aunt Cecile said calmly, from her seat near the window, "I'll stay seated, dear. I've been waiting for you." Pamela Okafor sat down in the chair my mother pulled for her at the near end of the table. She opened the briefcase with the quiet efficiency of a person who is not interested in drama, but also not frightened of it. She removed a second document in a cream envelope, set it on the tablecloth beside the first, and looked up at the table. She explained that Dorothy Ashworth had updated her will in March of the current year, 7 months before her death, and that the updated document had been properly witnessed and notarized by 2 independent parties, and that she was here to ensure the family received accurate information about its contents before any further steps were taken. She said this with the tone of a person who had done this before, who knew the specific kind of silence that tends to fall in a room when a will is about to be read differently than people expected, and who had learned to simply wait it out without filling the silence. Nobody filled it. Derek put his glass down. His hand went very still on the tablecloth. The updated will left the farmhouse and the property, 3.4 acres on County Road 7, with the outbuilding, the kitchen garden, and the dock on the small pond behind, to me and my mother jointly. It left the remaining estate assets, which included a savings account of $47,312 and a small portfolio of savings bonds accumulated since the 1980s, split equally among all 4 of Dorothy's grandchildren. Pamela Okafor read each section in a level voice, pausing between sections, not hurrying. The room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I could hear someone's chair shift. I could hear from somewhere outside the wind moving through the maple. The will included a letter of instruction. Pamela Okafor asked if the family was ready for her to read it. No one objected. She read it in the same level voice, without editorializing. The letter said that Dorothy had updated the will because she believed that a home should go to the people who had made it a home. That a house was not a reward, it was a continuation. That she had watched from the kitchen window and from the dock and from the guest bedroom window in her last months, who came without being asked, and she wanted the record to reflect what she had observed. The letter said she had been grateful for every visit and every phone call and every Tuesday afternoon that had been given freely, without expectation of return. It said, "Wren knows which Tuesdays I mean." I put my hand over my mouth. I did not cry. I did not need to. My Aunt Cecile, across the table, folded her hands and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at me and said, very quietly, "There it is." Derek stood up. He said several things. I did not track all of them. I heard the word pressured, and I heard the word contest, and I heard the word outrageous. My mother put her hand on my shoulder and kept it there. My cousin Lily, to my right, had taken out her headphones and was holding them in her lap and watching Derek with an expression I would think about later, something between alarm and understanding, the look of a 17-year-old seeing clearly for the first time how the adults in her family actually work. Sasha was looking at Derek with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not angry, but something more like fatigue, the look of someone who has been waiting to see which version of a person they're actually with and has just received their answer. I looked at the envelope on the tablecloth. I had not planned any of this. I had not called Pamela Okafor. I had not arranged for this. Grandma Dorothy had arranged it, in March, 7 months before she died, when she was clear and deliberate and careful about documents, because she had always been a careful woman. She had set everything where it should be. She had done it without telling me because she knew, the way she knew most things, that my knowing would have changed how I carried myself through the intervening months, and she wanted me to arrive at that Thanksgiving table the same way I had arrived at 11 ordinary Tuesdays, without agenda, without performance, without anything other than showing up. Derek left before the pie. He and Sasha drove back to Burlington that same evening, and he did not say goodbye to anyone except, apparently, Sasha's car keys, which I know only because Cecile reported seeing him stand in the driveway for 3 minutes before getting in. I watched from the window, just for a moment, not with satisfaction, Not with triumph, just with the particular feeling of witnessing something that has reached its natural end. The champagne glasses were still on the table. Someone had poured us out. In the week that followed, I received 14 text messages from Derek and one voicemail, which I listened to twice and then saved without responding. He said that the will was being contested. He said that Grandma had been pressured. He said that he was going to prove it. He said that I knew what I'd done. There was a moment, listening to that voicemail the second time, when something cold moved through me. Not fear exactly, but the close cousin of it, the recognition that the performance had not ended just because the room had emptied. I sat with that feeling for about 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and typed up a log of each message. Date, time, content, 30 words maximum. I emailed the log to Pamela Okafor's office with a note explaining what had been said, because that is what she had advised me to do at the end of the meeting, when she had shaken my hand and said, without drama, document everything that follows. Come see me if anything escalates. Pamela Okafor replied within 2 hours. She said the messages were noted. She said I had done the right thing. She said, your grandmother chose well when she updated that document. She also chose well in the way she prepared you to receive it. I read that email 3 times. My mother stayed at the farmhouse for 3 more days. We ate leftover pie for breakfast 2 mornings in a row and talked about Grandma Dorothy, the way you can finally talk about someone when the performance of the day is over, the real things, the small things. The way she folded napkins into specific shapes for specific occasions. The way she hummed while she cooked. Always the same 3 bars of a song she said she'd learned at 17 and could never remember the rest of. The way she had a specific voice for the telephone and a different voice for the kitchen, and how the kitchen voice was warmer, and how being in the kitchen with her was always better than any other room. The way she had known the name of every bird that came to her feeder and had taught me every single one the summer I was 9, sitting on the dock in the early mornings before anyone else was awake, with the field guide open between us. She planned this from at least March, my mother said on the second morning, looking at the recipe cards still propped on the windowsill. Maybe earlier. I said I thought it was probably earlier. I thought it might have been the autumn before, the October, when she called me about the medication, and I stayed on the phone for 45 minutes. I thought she might have made up her mind then, quietly, the way she made up her mind about everything, without announcing it, without making it a performance. Cecile sat with us on the second morning and told us something none of us had known, that Dorothy had spoken to her in August, 2 weeks before her decline became serious, and had said she was at peace about the house. She knew, Cecile said, wrapping her hands around a coffee cup. She always knew which Tuesday afternoon was worth more than a Christmas card. I called Nadia that evening from a small upstairs bedroom that had been mine every summer I visited. The same twin bed. The same patchwork quilt in green and yellow that Dorothy had made. The same view from the window of the maple at the edge of the yard, bare now, holding the sky. Did you expect it? Nadia said. I thought about it. I said. I didn't let myself. But I think some part of me knew. The way she laughed on the phone in July. She laughed like someone who has already handled something and is glad it's handled. Nadia said. She sounds like she was something. I said, she was the kind of person who wrote 47 letters. Derek did not pursue the contest. His lawyer, it turned out, advised against it after reviewing the documentation. The will had been signed with 2 independent witnesses, notarized, and there was no evidence of anything but a clear-minded woman making a deliberate decision 7 months before her death. The farmhouse and the 3.4 acres on County Road 7 went to my mother and me jointly. We drove up together in January to begin clearing and organizing, and on the first morning there, my mother made coffee in the copper kettle that had sat on the same burner for 30 years, and we stood at the kitchen window looking out at the small frozen pond, and neither of us said anything for a long time, and that felt exactly right. That felt like the most honest silence I had sat in a long time. The thing I kept coming back to in the months after Thanksgiving was the letter. Not the legal document. The letter that Pamela Okafor had read aloud. The one that said Dorothy had updated the will because she believed a home should go to the people who made it a home. The one that said Ren knows which Tuesdays I mean. I thought about my brother, about what it cost him to stand at that table and give that toast. Not the material cost. The other kind. I thought about our father, who had done something similar to Derek that our father's father had probably done to him. The oldest pattern in the world. The one that moves through families like weather, taking out everything in its path. Derek had not invented his cruelty. He had inherited it the way people inherit debts. Without signing for it, without being asked, without being told what was being handed to them. That did not make what he had said forgivable, but it made it comprehensible. And comprehensible is something. Comprehensible means you can look at it clearly. It means you can decide what you want to carry forward and what you want to set down. I finished my junior year and then my senior year. I graduated in May with a degree in social work, and my mother came, and so did Cecile, who wore a hat with a yellow feather in it and said that Dorothy would have been furious to miss it, and then laughed the short, particular laugh that reminded me with a physical jolt of my grandmother's. I cried at graduation, which surprised me, because I am not usually a crier. Nadia found me afterward under the elm tree by the quad and asked why, and I said, because she wrote 47 letters, and I never once told her what they meant. Nadia was quiet for a moment. She said, I think she knew. I thought she was right. But knowing and telling are different things, and I had not done the telling, and I had to allow that to be what it was, a thing I would carry, not a wound, just a fact about who I had been at 22 versus who I was learning to be at 23 and 24. The degree I held in my hand was the thing she had pointed me toward at 15 over buttermilk pie in that kitchen. It felt like the receipt for everything. The farmhouse became something we went to in the summers. My mother handled the maintenance. I drove up when I could, still too often for a person on a starting social worker's salary, the mileage still adding up, and I still did not mind. The copper kettle was still on its burner. The recipe cards were still in the holder on the windowsill. The field guide was still on the shelf by the back door, pages soft from 30 years of use. What I understand now that I did not understand at 23 is that the house was never really the point. What Grandma Dorothy had done with her will was not primarily about property. It was about the record. It was about making the record say the true thing, that a granddaughter had shown up on 11 ordinary Tuesdays when nothing was required, and that those Tuesdays had been seen, and that being seen matters in a family, even if it takes a document to say so. Some people will tell you that love should go without saying, that you should not need receipts for it, that the people who love you know that you love them, and that should be enough. And maybe that is true when the family is working. When the family is not working, the receipts are the only thing that will hold up in a room. Real family does not test whether you can survive without them. I have the 47 letters still. They are in the cedar box, which sits now on the windowsill of my office. I am a licensed clinical social worker now. I have my own small office on the second floor of a building on Elmwood Avenue, and sometimes in the late afternoon the light hits the cedar the way it used to hit the kitchen counter of the farmhouse, and I think about her. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to my front door. I have not seen Derek since Thanksgiving. He sent one more message in February, not angry, just a question, asking if I was going to be at the farmhouse for the 4th of July. I wrote back that I didn't know yet. He didn't write again. That silence, like his first silence, felt like its own kind of answer. I decided I did not need another kind. I went to the farmhouse for the 4th of July. I brought Nadia. We sat on the dock in the evening after the fireworks with our feet in the water and listened to the birds, and I named every single one of them because my grandmother had taught me when I was 9, and I had not forgotten a single name. Saying no did not make me cruel. It made me responsible. Choosing to be seen clearly, without softening what was real, is not cruelty. It is the only version of care that lasts. If you have ever sat in a room and watched someone perform their version of a story you know the real version of, and said nothing, and smiled, and waited, and trusted that the truth is patient enough to wait with you, then you already know the thing my grandmother knew. You already know what she meant when she laughed that short, particular laugh in July and said, "Then we agree."